Good evening. This is the unit plan for Mr. Overton's 10th grade AP US History class. And the unit we are looking at is the American Civil Rights Movement, which will last 8 days, concluding with the test day. Now, the overarching essential questions for this unit are: what are protests and what effect did they have on the civil rights era? Pretty basic. Also, what are the major goals and styles of the different movements in this era? We'll be talking about several different organizations and movements and figures during this lesson, during this unit. And lastly, how can we see these movements influence today? We'll also be connecting a lot of the movements to current issues, current things that are happening. So we'll scroll down to lesson number 1, which is what is a protest? We'll basically just be covering the basic background and concepts of what a protest is, what a social protest is. The learning objective is students will be able to explain different forms of protest. And we'll begin this by showing a video from YouTube of March for Our Lives protest that just happened recently from high school students. So it relates it to today, and we will go into a PowerPoint lecture over protest influence in the civil rights era. Over a lecture and a class discussion with that. Then we will open it up, allow students to go into a think, pair, share over protests and what they already think about protests, what their initial knowledge is of them. And we'll be able to end class with a Kahoot quiz on protests. That is lesson number 1. All the standards for each of the lessons are the same. U.S. History 7.1, 2, and 7, which cover the civil rights era and the organizations, the movements, and the conflicts of this era. Those 3 are all the same for each lesson in this unit. Now, our second lesson is Letter from a Birmingham Jail. The students will be able to identify the purpose and influence of this letter. Very influential piece written by Dr. Martin Luther King while he was in a Birmingham jail. The students will open class by briefly reading and listening to a letter from a Birmingham jail. Be able to get both of those senses of the reading. Then we'll go through a brief lecture just on the significance of this piece and how it influenced much of Dr. King's work. Then we'll be able to discuss the main ideas of the letter in small groups. And at the end of the lesson, the students will write a creative writing piece titled A Letter from a Pike High School. So just sort of translating a letter from a Birmingham jail to their current situation. And Pike High School will be able to use some creativity, some humor with it as well. Our third lesson is about the SCLC, which is Dr. King's group that he was involved with. Students will be able to explain the goals and characteristics of the SCLC. We'll start out this lesson by playing the I Have a Dream speech, which is probably the most well-known act of the SCLC, was that March on Washington and Dr. King giving the I Have a Dream speech. And playing that off of YouTube, then go into a brief PowerPoint on the main goals of the SCLC, how they organized themselves, what their main goals were in the civil rights era. Then the students will get into small groups and write a short SCLC speech at a possible meeting that would give instructions on how to prepare for an upcoming protest. And they will present this to the class. There will also be a Kahoot quiz on SCLC protests and key figures at the end of the lesson. Fourth lesson will transition to Malcolm X, and the students will be able to identify the objectives and the effect of Malcolm X. We'll start this by, again, starting with a video clip playing a scene from the movie X, which covers Malcolm X, with Denzel Washington playing Malcolm X. We'll play a short clip of that to give them sort of an image of this. Then we'll have some notes, some lecture, but in the form of a timeline, and we'll have this as a handout for students to be able to use as we look through Malcolm X, his timeline, and his brief tenure working with the civil rights movement. Then the students will split up into groups, small groups, and design a creative poster, something that a follower of the Malcolm X movement would have and would take to a protest. And they'll be able to use posters and markers for that. Be creative with it. At the end of the lesson, they can complete a small true-false exit slip about Malcolm X and his movement to end the lesson. The fifth lesson is talking about SNCC, another civil rights organization. There are a lot of them. SNCC is the Students Nonviolent Coordinating Corporation, another group. Students will be able to explain the goals and characteristics of this group. And again, we'll start out with playing a YouTube video of A March for Our Lives. Again, very current example of students and how they organize, and very similar to SNCC, so it ties in very well. Then the students will be designing an organized SNCC protest for Pike High School students. So do this in small groups, and allow them to be kind of creative, and they will have to go off of the organizational tendencies of SNCC. And they'll present this to the class, and I'll be able to grade these presentations on how close to the SNCC organization they stuck to. Next lesson will be the Black Panther Party. Students will be able to identify the main goals of the Black Panthers. After we play a couple videos, in this class will be mostly documentaries. I think they really show the visual image of the Black Panther Party. That's really key in understanding them, because they're very controversial, very difficult to understand. So we'll start out with playing a Forrest Gump clip. Most students have seen that. It's a very popular movie. There's a scene of the Black Panther Party there. And then we'll go into a class discussion on that Forrest Gump clip, briefly talk about Black Panthers, and then we'll be watching a documentary throughout the rest of the class on the Black Panther Party. And at the end of the lesson, they will complete an exit slip on that documentary. Seventh lesson is just the review for the test. And the students will be able to describe the various civil rights movements and organizations. They'll be able to do this through multiple choice practice on the board, and I will be able to facilitate that and help them through that multiple choice practice. You can do it out loud as a class. And then at the end, I and some other students will be able to make Kahoots and make a little contest out of a Kahoot review for the test. And the last lesson is just test day. Students will be able to describe a specific protest style, identify the different civil rights movements, and analyze their impact on the era. This test will be multiple choice and essay. The students will know the essay prompts prior to the test, and they'll have a choice on which one to answer. The directions of the test will be read aloud and printed on the paper so that everyone is clear on the objectives and the directions of this test. And that concludes our unit plan for the American Civil Rights Movement. Thank you.